one time you competed internationally even though your quad wasn't intact. Can you tell me about that?
I can't think of what year it was in, but we were getting ready for the World Championships, and my training cycle was the best one I've ever had. It was the strongest I ever was in my training, and it was a little bit more than a week out from the World Championships, and I just snatched and clean and jerked my all-time best. I clean and jerked 118 at 58 kilos. And I started my pulls, and the first pull that I took was 120 kilos, and I ripped it off the ground and my strap broke at the top of my pull, and that caused me to cartwheel sideways a little bit. And then as I came down, my weight was planted on my right leg, and then I knew the bar was going to hit it, but I couldn't move it because all my weight was on it. So it hit my leg at 90 degrees and severed my quadricep. You know, at the time I was laying on the platform and I was like, man, I can't breathe. Like, I felt like I was laying on the platform forever, like hyperventilating and shit, but I'm sure it was only a couple minutes. I got myself up and the trainer was like, oh man, that doesn't look very good, but probably just bruised it. So he's like, why don't you go down to sports medicine and you know, ice it and whatever. So I did that. It was like maybe like a Friday, probably. It was like a Friday. And then I came in and trained a little on Saturday, trained a little on Monday, and then the orthos came in like once or twice a week. I saw him on Wednesday, and I was leaving for the Dominican Republic the next day, and he was like, yeah, I really don't like the way this looks, but, you know, come see me when you get back, and we'll look at it a little more. So I went to the World Championships. I almost bombed out in the snatch. Was terrible. So I had a complete rupture of my vastus medialis and 50% of the rectus, and I split the rectus up the middle about quite a bit. And so I didn't have any end range motion. So if you know anything about weightlifting, getting out of the bottom, especially like of a deep squat, like a snatch, for instance, I didn't have that end range motion. So I couldn't get out of the bottom, so I was trying to power snatch to stay as high as I could, right? So I missed my first 2 snatches at the World Championships. Then I was like, oh my God, you cannot bomb out. So then I had to have this little like come to Jesus meeting with myself and be like, what the hell, get your shit together, right? And I came back and I made my 3rd snatch, and then I made 2 clean and jerks. I think my best was like 109, which wasn't good, but again, I had one leg, so... and I was really mad and upset because I should have placed really high, maybe even snuck in for some medals, and instead I finished like 10th or 11th.
But that's at the world stage.
I know.
That's actually insane.
And so, you know, I'd had my best training, did my best lifts, and then that crap fell on my leg, and it was pretty devastating. But then I got back to Colorado, and the surgeon was like, yep, this is career ending. We can't fix this. You've walked around on a severed quadricep for almost 4 or 5 weeks now. And I was like, but you told me it was fine. Come see me when you get back. So anyway, he did fix it, and I didn't have any issues with it. I did a back squat with 180, maybe like 9 months after I had my quadricep reattached. So that was pretty cool. I was happy with that. And I have never to this day had any issues with it at all.
From what I've been told anyway, is that because you're so fit, like if you're competing at world level anyway, because you're so fit, recovery is faster than normal people.
I mean, I would say probably, yeah, because you're already starting out at a pretty high strength base, right? So I think that, and I've had a few shoulder reconstructions and stuff as well, but I was always able to push it up way more and do more faster than like your general population athlete probably would do.
Now that adrenaline story is out of the way, let's talk about, what do you think? Let's talk about CrossFit.
Well, I mean, I think CrossFit has done a lot of really good things for weightlifting. Like, it's brought people into weightlifting that wouldn't have really known about it, and I think that's really cool. And it's really helped us build our depth at like our national championships and stuff, because we just have more people, right? Like when I was an athlete back in the late 90s, early 2000s, you had really, really good athletes, right? Maybe a couple in each weight class, and then everybody else. And now it's great because like if you go to nationals, like that top 10 or 12, they are really, really good. So it's really pushed up the level of weightlifting, especially at our national events, and it has improved our participation significantly.
For me, that's the reason why I competed a while ago too. Like, it was at your gym actually.
Yeah.
CrossFit was the gate. It was my introduction to weightlifting, and then that's when I trained for a little bit and then competed at your
Did you
gym.
like it? Was it fun?
Yeah, it's really good. It's nerve-wracking, especially when when you have 3 lifts and everyone's looking at you. It's completely different from the environment in CrossFit where like everyone's like cheering, before. But it was a good experience. Definitely.
It's you against the bar, really, right? And so you gotta get out there and just do what you train to do. But there's all these other variables, right? Like people and environment and stuff, and so it makes it fun, but also can be a little bit nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's a good experience. I think everyone should do it, especially for the CrossFitters here.
Yeah,
I think they should do it.
It's really fun.
Mm-hmm. So, what's special about weightlifting compared to other sports?
Weightlifting, I love about weightlifting is it has that individual component to it. So I don't have to depend on someone else, right, to make sure, I place or whatever. It's just me and the weight. And I love that about weightlifting. It's a very much like some of the other sports that I've done. Gymnastics, right? Like you train the same routine over and over, and you're really just kind of working on perfection. Anyone who knows who's ever snatched, even the one that feels amazing, there's always something to fix, right? So you're always just kind of just working to be better. And so for my type A personality, it really feeds it really well because I'm always, and it's like very mindful. You have to really be conscious and thinking about the movements all the time. So there's a huge like mind-body component that you don't get in a lot of other sports.
How do you help other athletes get it? I mean, especially the ones who don't have patience, because holy crap. But I mean, when you look at a snatch, right? I mean, it looks like you're just getting a bar over your head. But when you're learning it, there's so many sub parts to it.
Yeah.
How do you help someone be patient to learn all of it?
So we always start with little pieces and we teach the little pieces of the movements, and then we put them all together at the end into the full movement. So you're breaking it down and you're teaching. And this is like if I was teaching my little son, he just turned 11. This will be his first national meet, but he's lifted in some local meets, right? And he loves it. But I still want him to develop really good technique. And so we really teach a lot of the components of the lifts in separate pieces. And then we put it all back together at the end in that full movement. And that really allows them to learn the little pieces.
Yes,
So-
to those who are listening who don't know what we're talking about, the pieces, can you give us a broad stroke of,
Sure.
let's say, the snatch? Let's talk
Yeah.
the pieces that are in the snatch.
So always when we teach snatch and snatch teaching progressions, we are going to teach the person what a snatch grip is. That's always going to be the first thing you want to teach, right? Like, what is your snatch grip? Where that bar contacts into that hip crease is where you want to grip the bar. So that's your snatch grip. And then before we do any of that, we need to make sure they have the mobility and flexibility that's required to do an overhead squat or an overhead squat movement. So we might want to look at that. We're going to teach the athlete how to pick the barbell up safely off the ground in a snatch grip, because it's very different than a clean grip. It's more difficult to get into a start position in a snatch than it is in a clean. So we're going to teach that. And then we always teach from the top down. So we teach power snatch, we teach snatch pull from power position. We teach muscle snatch from power position. We teach everything from power position. When that person is really good with power position, we go to the knee position and we teach everything from the knee position. And that could be like power snatch plus overhead squat. It could be snatch pulls. It could be snatch high pulls. It could be all of the things you want to teach, and you're going to teach them from the different positions. Then I teach just below the knee because we need to teach them how to transition their knees when the barbell comes around the knee, and then we transition to the floor. So you're getting all of these different pieces and you're learning them really well. And then when you go to the floor, everything kind of connects a little bit better because you've learned all the pieces too. The puzzle, I guess, if you want to call it.
So that deadlift, right? They say the deadlift from the snatch isn't really a deadlift. Can you explain that?
Well, you're going to push with your legs. So you can think of it more as a squat if you want, because you're pushing your feet into the ground and your legs are moving the barbell from the floor to the knee. So that has to happen. Otherwise you get boop, hips up early, right?
What's bad about the hips going early?
Then that means you're lifting all of the weight with your back. And we're strong in our legs, right? It's where all of our power is. So we want to utilize our legs to move the barbell.
How about the clean and jerk?
Sure. What do you want to specifically know?
The slight differences because of the grip, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So for the clean, your grip is going to be closer, but it has a lot of variability because everyone's arm lengths and limb lengths and everything are a little bit different. And it is very variant based on where you grip the barbell. Some people like to grip the barbell close. Some people might have a little bit of wider grip. So when your bar comes into power position for the clean, it should be contacting somewhere around mid quadricep. Now, me, for example, I have really short arms and I don't have much leg either, right? I'm 5 foot. So but I like a wider grip. So where does that bring my bar? It brings it up much higher on my leg to make contact than maybe it would somebody else because I have a wider grip and I don't have long arms, right? But if you have a guy that has really long arms and they like a narrower grip, that contact is going to be much lower on the leg into that power position.
So is that grip, is it preference?
Yeah, actually for clean, usually we tell them to find a position that's comfortable in the rack, right? Because you might want to grip really wide, but if you can't rack it, right, that's no good. So we usually, and for beginners especially, we want them to always use the same grip width for both clean and jerk, right? So usually I'll start with like 1 thumb length from the knurling start for beginners just to kind of give them a start. But if you have a little kid, they might be inside of that knurling because they're really teeny. And so you gotta just kind of look and see what makes sense. But if you look at the rack position, it'll give you a really good idea about where they should have their grip because there's always gonna be a most comfortable rack position for that person.
Yeah. How about the ones who are like, they start out wide and then they go narrower so that they can push harder? At the top for the jerk.
We don't see that a lot, especially in high level weightlifting. We see where they move their hands out for the jerk. Right? Like if you look at the Colombians and some of the South American countries, they're almost all the way back out to a snatch grip when they jerk it. So they'll clean it with a normal grip and then they're like way out here for the jerk. And they do that because it shortens the distance. They have to put the barbell over their head, right? But in doing that, you're giving up stability and the overhead position is harder with a wider grip.
So how about like there's like several variations, right? Like coaching cues or even like philosophies. I'll just walk you through it one by one. What's the deal with stomping versus not stomping?
So think about it like this. Anytime your feet are not on the ground, you're not producing force. So if your feet are taking this big high kick, think about all the lost power there is. We want to be really fast. We want to get our feet up. We want to slide them out just enough so that we have a better receiving position. We want to get them back down on the ground as fast as possible.
So how about the one where at the starting position, they're narrow and then they go wide versus how the Chinese do it where their stance is already wide from the deadlift? For the starting position.
Are you talking about snatch or clean?
Snatch.
So you're saying the Chinese have a wider start position, but they might not move their feet, but they're staying in that same position. We see that sometimes, right? And that's okay. What we want is every athlete is going to be different and look different. And that's, really important to recognize. And all athletes kind of need to figure out what works for them within their own body type and structure and limb length and things like that. And so sometimes it's just more comfortable for the athlete to maybe start with their feet a little bit wider. But most of the time, if you're starting with your feet a little bit wider, they're not moving further out, right? Like we don't want to see starfish. So they're still going up and coming down. They're just not moving out because they're already starting in a wider position. But maybe they feel stronger in that wider position in the pull.
Okay, so how about this? Since you have a master's in sports physiology, right?
Yeah.
If you were going to take an athlete maybe from middle school or high school, what kind of athlete are you looking for? What background do you want that person to have?
I'm pretty open to any kind of background as long as the kid can move decently. I like wrestlers. I like throwers. I like gymnasts. They usually have a really good movement background, and that's really what it takes to be pretty good or learn Olympic weightlifting, because they already understand kind of how to move their body in space a little bit, and so they can pick up on it a little bit faster. But I can teach anybody how to do weightlifting. Doesn't matter what their background is. And you might find that person, maybe that Hampton Morris that walks in off the street, someone you don't ever think, when you look at him, is the best of the best, right? But he's that gem that just kind of strolled in off the street. So
what would make them a freak of nature?
Well, they have to have the mindset, and that I think is probably the hardest one to find. Like, you're going to find really strong athletes, right? And we like strong athletes, and I like strong athletes because it takes years to develop strength, but I can teach you how to weightlift if you're already strong, right? But you also have to have that mindset to be willing to push yourself, or not everyone is willing to throw themselves under a max effort snatch and be confident, right? And that's really what it takes to be a really good weightlifter, is to have really strong mental aspects as well. Like,
is that trainable?
I mean, it is trainable to some degree, but like, look at Olivia Reeves. She's an outlier, right? She's fabulous, fabulous young lady, and she has no fear, right? Like, the first time I pull a lift, I'm like, oh, if I'm pulling 95 kilos in the snatch and I've never pulled it and tried to get underneath it before, there's something about that doesn't really allow your mind to go all out, because you're like, oh gosh, this might kill me. Like, your mind starts thinking about those things, right? But some people just have the ability to really push through that a lot better than others.
I mean, maybe I'm just oversimplifying this, but is it as simple as just teaching them how to bail?
No, it's not. I mean, yes, it's really a confidence thing when you come down to it, right? Like, you have to build confidence in those heavier movements, in those heavier lifts. And as your confidence comes up, what happens? You make it. And now you're shooting for another number, right? In theoretics. But at some point, your brain sometimes is going to be like, yep, nope. Self-preservation is more important than you making this lift. So
I kind of know what you're talking about, because we do have, even though in our fundamentalist class we do teach some of the newer members to bail.
We teach everybody how to do it. Everybody needs to learn how to safely get out from underneath a weight. Mm-hmm. Should really teach that to every single person that comes into your gym.
But when it comes to like max effort, it's like, oh, I'm only adding like a small cookie plate, and they get really scared to do it.
Half a kilo.
Yeah.
And we laugh about that all the time in the gym, but we're like, you just smoked 80 kilos. Beautiful, looks good, everything was perfect, and you put on 81, and that shit can't even get off the floor, And that is a lot of that mental aspect.
Let's switch gears to building an international level athlete.
Yeah.
Right. What's step one to developing a world-class weightlifter besides the basics that you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, you got to have that right athlete kind of walk through your door, and then they have to have a love for the sport. And that love has to be bigger than life stuff. And we have a lot of really talented athletes that come in to weightlifting all the time, but we can't keep them for reasons financial or other, and they just don't have that same love for the sport that some athletes have, that are willing to do whatever it takes to go to the Olympics or do whatever, right? So you have to have that. And that's a really hard thing to find. Like, kids could be really good, and then at some point they're like, I'm gonna get married and have kids. And so you have to have that. That's the number one. You have to have a really talented athlete with the correct mindset. And then it just takes years of training and development. Like, most people do not get good in weightlifting overnight. And I always tell my athletes at the gym, Rome wasn't built in a day. We don't build weightlifters like that either, right? Like you have to put in hard work and repetitions and train, and it's monotonous. And that's why you have to have the love of weightlifting to continue to train and do those things years and years, right? And just developing that athlete, you know, one little step at a time, one PR at a time, one lift at a time. And it does take a long time.
Let's say they have the qualifications. Like, what's the average time, the duration that you can take them from a beginner to a world-class weightlifter?
It's really hard to say because everyone's different, and your very best athletes, they do it really fast, right? But like a normal person, 8 years.
That's really long.
Right? Like if you had a kid walk into your gym and you said, even if they were really good and they were really strong, this Olympics is already done. Like if you're not already there at the top, you can't make the team. Like it's qualification's going to start. You got to be making world teams and going to the qualifications. So it's done. So like you'd be looking at 4 or 8 more years to develop that athlete to that level.
Is it possible for a 25-year-old to develop?
Sure, absolutely is. So I don't know, a lot of people don't maybe not know this about me, but I was a multi-sport athlete. I did high school and college gymnastics. And then on the 5th year of my eligibility at the University of Wisconsin Lacrosse, I wrestled on the men's team. And I then continued to wrestle. I wrestled on the national team. I got a silver medal at the World Championships in 1996 for women's wrestling. And then I was a strength coach at Northwestern. I met Tara at a wrestling camp at the training center. Tara Knott won a gold medal in 2000 at the Olympics for weightlifting. This was way before that. And I was living in Chicago, and Mike Gattone is from Chicago. She's like, my coach lives in Chicago. And he was the assistant strength coach for the Chicago Bulls. And I was at Northwestern, so I was like, oh, this could be really good, networking and stuff. And he was like, hey, do you want to train with me a couple days a week? And I was like, you know, but then I was like, networking, strength conditioning. You know, he's working with Al Vermeil, and these are all like really big names in strength conditioning, and could be really good for my career to just kind of go out and meet some of these people and do some stuff. And I lifted in one meet and qualified for nationals. And then I was invited to come out to the training center and train full time. So I walked away from my job at Northwestern. This was my dream job, Big Ten University. And I walked away, and I came to the training center and I was 27. Yep. I started at the Olympic Training Center and I was 27. It was January 4th, 1999. And I trained through 2013. And my son was born in 2014. So I always laugh as he punched my retirement ticket a little bit, but you know, I was in my 40s by that point, so it was time. It was definitely time. But so that is the kind of athlete that I'm talking about, right? Like that one person that loves the sport so much that they do everything in their power. I mean, for me, I laugh about it now a little bit because I spent a lifetime chasing that dream of going to the Olympics, right? But those are the kind of people that you really need because they love the sport so much. They don't care about all the other stuff, right?
I remember when one training session was like 2.5 hours long, 3.5 hours long. And I thought it was wild. It was really long. And I was talking to this chick who competed at your competition. And she was like, yeah, we're there from 6 to 9. And I didn't know that was normal. Is your program like that for some of your competitors?
2.5 hours usually is what it takes to get through it. Now, some people go a little faster and some people go a little slower and some are a little chatty, you know? And so it really varies based on each athlete. But yeah, I mean, you're doing quite a bit of volume on my training programs for sure. Most people train 4 days a week. We always want to do the minimal stimulus required to get the most result. So if I can do that on 2 days a week for somebody, then I want to do that on 2 days a week. Right? And then when they start to plateau a little bit, then we can be like, okay, we need to add this next day.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about. Let's be tactical. How about let's start with how you periodize stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, you can talk about the standard first, and then
Yeah.
you can talk about how you change stuff.
Yeah, so I use, typically in weightlifting, you're going to see a linear in nature periodization most of the time. Sometimes you'll see a non-linear periodization, and we'll talk about the differences in the two in a second. Linear periodization starts at like 60 to 70%, and it goes to 100, right? Like, it's pretty basic. You're going to take the period of time that you have, which can be any amount of time from this event to their goal, or this day to the goal, and you're going to lay it out. Now, the reason we use periodization is because we have to make sure that we're putting in rest and recovery into our training programs. And your program is only as good as your athlete's ability to recover from the stimulus that you're providing. So if the athlete can't recover, it's shit, right? Like, they're never going to get better. So we have to make sure that we're building that in, planning for it into our training cycles. And that's why we really use periodization, because it allows us to manipulate the variables and have better control over that recovery for those athletes. So we're starting at 70% and we're building to 100%.
60 or 70%?
Yeah, I start at 60, 65, just depending on how much time I have. And then I typically write a 4-week block.
You 4-week block meaning?
So every 4 weeks, the third week is a deload. And then we'll do a new block with new exercises, new focus. So every 4 weeks, now I've done 3-week blocks where you do 2 weeks on, 1 week recovery, 2 weeks on, 1 week recovery. Again, every 3 weeks, you'd be changing your exercises. Research tells us that if you change your exercises too often, the athletes can't learn the exercises. They never get proficient at them. They're not getting enough of that movement to be good at it. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining the same exercises, at least for, I say, a minimum of 3 weeks. I've used scissor periodization before for like super heavy masters lifters, where we might go 1 week up, 1 week down, 1 week up, 1 week down. And it kind of builds like that, because if you have someone that's 65 and they're a super heavyweight, their ability to recover is significantly less than a 45 kilo lifter who's 16. Right?
Yeah, they recover fast.
Yes. So whenever you're looking at like an athlete's ability to recover, smaller weight classes and females can do more volume and more intensity at higher percentages than heavier male athletes.
Interesting. Why is that?
It's just something I've noticed over the years. I think that our bodies just can take more volume than males, and we do better with a little bit more volume than your guys do. They tend to break down a little bit easier and need a little bit more recovery for the heavier intensities especially. So
Yeah, let's make it more concrete for those who are like it's still over their heads. So how about let's say we have a competition coming up in 6 months. So you start at 60%. I'm guessing you start them out with a max out if they know.
Well, they would have already had that number previously to starting.
Okay.
If they're a new person, like a beginner or a kid, the only thing that we use to dictate intensity is quality of the movement pattern. So if that means like my son, obviously I know what his maxes are because he's lifting competitions, but we don't use them. We only use the quality of the movement pattern on that day to dictate the load, right? Like, I don't know what happens. Some days he can snatch and it's really nice, and other days it's a complete train wreck, right? So we can't continue to just put weight on and put weight on and put weight on. We need to, look at the quality of the movement pattern and say, okay, this looks really bad. Today we're going to stay with this 10 kilos, and we're going to do it over and over again until it gets really good, right? So whenever you're looking at kids, beginners, only thing that you should ever use to dictate the load is the quality of the movement pattern, okay? Then once they've gotten a little bit more advanced and you kind of have an idea, you can guesstimate a 1 rep max, or you can just pick a number that they can do and then kind of work on that. And if they're able to do all of the reps for that volume and intensity, then you can bump that up a little bit for the next block, right?
Block meaning your 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, the 4 weeks or whatever it is, and kind of just build on it a little bit that way. If you don't have an actual number that you're working off of. And I always, for athletes, I think it's really important that they go through an entire training phase before you ever take them to a single heavy max lift, because they need those repetitions and they need to feel confident. And they also need to have had a couple really bad lifts so they know how to bail, right? So that they feel comfortable when it gets heavy, that they're not gonna drop it on their head or some of those other things that people fear when we get heavy.
So what about someone who already have their number?
Yep, so we'll start at 60. And like if for my first training block, I would go 60 to 65, 65 to 70. I would deload to 60 and go 75 to 80, right? So each week can build. You always want to follow the deload week with a little bit heavier, higher intensity, right? So, and then you can start your next training block maybe at 65%. And then it just kind of builds up from there, however you want to lay it out and however much time you have.
So if you're seeing that they're not recovering and then like following week, it's like you're still at 60, let's say 67 and you can't go to 70. Do you stay there or?
Yeah, so you see, I write a range. And I learned this years ago. It's really, really helpful for athletes and coaches to have an expectation of a range. Because if you put 80% on the program and I show up and I had a really shitty day, I have school, I have work, I have life, right? Because you have to factor all of those things into people's programming. And I can't get 80%. I'm kicking and screaming and there's tears sometimes for girls, right? Like, and boys. Like there's tantrums and all kinds of shit when the goal cannot be met, when they feel like they should be able to do it. So if you go 75 to 80, it's a win-win. I'm feeling crappy today, but look, I hit the 75% range. Wow, I feel really good. Maybe we took 82% on our last one. Right? So you kind of you can work in that range a little bit. And I love that. And that's been super helpful. I found that out very quickly.
Yeah, I actually used to train with someone. Yeah, she's a female. And there were days where, yeah, she was really emotional. And she was, yeah, that was interesting. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Even for me, I mean, it was, yeah, like there were days where like a 65 was easy. And then next thing you know, it's like, why am I... Even just like kept getting just a little bit lack of sleep. I mean, because it's
anything. You didn't eat breakfast. You didn't eat enough calories. You had a hard test at school. All of those things are going to affect that person's ability to do that percentage.
Especially because of the form, right? There's the form factor.
Yeah, because it's your nervous system too, and everything has to work together. We call it neuromuscular efficiency, right? That has to be really on in order to make those things happen.
Yeah, because I've done powerlifting, and that was like...
Powerlifting is easy.
It's easy. You just rip it.
Yeah,
just go.
You don't have doesn't have the same mental component or that high neuromuscular efficiency that's required to snatch that a bench press might require, or even like a squat, which is why we call those, we can do squats and deadlifts and push presses and those exercises have a lower neuromuscular efficiency or neuromuscular requirement. So we can do those at higher percentages for more repetitions than you could for a snatch, for example.
Have you dealt with any athletes who have muscular endurance problem? Because it's like building up all the way to 270 pounds, like that's a lot of reps just warming up to that heavy weight. How do you deal with the muscular endurance problem?
By the time they've gotten to those heavier weights, they've already put in a lot of work, so they should be ready to go. So I equate it to this, like being able to build a strong house with a strong foundation. That's why we do the lighter weights with the higher repetitions, because it allows us to build that endurance and that stamina, or whatever you want to call it, at the lighter percentages, and we build on that as it gets heavier. But if you don't do this, then guess what? You have a really poor foundation. So that's when you start to see athletes struggle a lot.
In case people missed it. So at the lighter weight, the 60%, right? Mm-hmm. That's more, you said higher volume. That's
higher
more reps.
volume. So we know that intensity and volume have an inverse relationship, right? So if intensity is high, volume is very low, right? But if intensity is low, volume is high. And so we are going to work like this. So low intensity, high volume, 60%. High intensity, low volume, 100%. And it's a range. And it does this as you work through those percentages. Okay. Right? So if we have like a rep range that we typically stick with for like Olympic movements, specifically like snatch, clean, jerks. And usually anything above 90% is a single. 80%'s doubles, 70%'s triples. And so that kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, this intensity is getting high. This is where my volume has to be, right? But like, let's take a squat, for example. I often write for kids that really need to work on some leg strength, they'll do a squat program. And at the end of the squat program, I'll ask them to do 100% for a double of their previous max. And usually they're very successful at that, right? But we can do that because it's not as neuromuscularly taxing, right? So we can do higher reps at those strength exercises versus snatch and clean and jerk.
So how does RPE come into play? Because like, in bodybuilding, it's like, 7 to 10. If you can do 10, more stimulus, the better, as long as you can recover from it. In powerlifting, I think it's still, you can use RPE.
So in weightlifting, we don't love RPE. We don't use a lot of RPE in weightlifting specific. I've used it for powerlifting and I've used it for other things. But RPE is not a good indicator of where an athlete should be for snatch and clean and jerk specifically. Because I could snatch 50 kilos and feel like an RPE of 10, right? And that's because maybe I'm not warmed up as much as I needed to, or like even like 70 and 80% could feel terrible, right? But I still have to hit 90%. So I need to kind of work through that a little bit. And RPE doesn't really give us a really good indicator of where we are, especially for Olympic specific movements.
Mm-hmm. How about conditioning? How do you give your athletes any conditioning workouts?
So typically the way my workout is set up is that they'll come in and do their dynamic warm-up or whatever specific warm-up they need to do for that workout that they have. And then they're going to do a specific warm-up exercise for the key technical exercise that we have programmed. So it could be a snatch balance for a snatch, or a snatch grip push press overhead squat, or an overhead squat, or a snatch from power position. Could be any number of exercises, just 4 sets, under 50%, working on warming up for that specific exercise. Then we're gonna do that exercise, or maybe we do 2. We might do a pull, a squat, a press, and then we're gonna put all of the auxiliary exercises specific to the athlete on the end. So it depends on the person's goals as to what they might find on their program. Could be some sled pushes, right? It could be a little mini circuit. It could be who knows what.
I imagine you have accessory exercises as well. Talk about some of those accessory exercises, or like how to keep their stabilizers healthy and strong.
So we do a lot of core, because core is really important for Olympic lifting, but it depends. Like for me, I've had 3 rotator cuff reconstructions. So that rotator cuff exercises, they're going to always be in my program forever, right? So it depends on the athlete, because depending on what that athlete needs is going to depend on the accessory work that they get. We might do a lot of single leg Bulgarian split squats and lunges and stuff like that, just depending on that athlete and what they need. Could be a whole plethora of different things, but
I mean, because you have a lot of athletes. I mean, do you go through the program one by one, or is it?
I run an individualized program one by one for every athlete every week. I might have a base program that I'm pulling it from. Like if everyone is lifting at nationals, they might have the same base program or I'm writing like the same base program, and then I'm individualizing it for each athlete based on what they need specifically.
That's pretty cool. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
So there's this hot take on Reddit that says that once your form is decent, at some point you're going to have to really work on your strength, because if your form's, if you know how to snatch, and your strength is the bottleneck, might as well do powerlifting. Yeah, you're already giving me this funny face. Like, what do you think about that?
So, every athlete is going to be different. Some athletes, their technique might be their issue. Other athletes' strength might be their issue. I already said I like strong athletes because I can teach a strong athlete how to be a good weightlifter, but sometimes it takes years to develop strength. And so if strength is the issue, get your patience, because we need some time to get you stronger. And that isn't something that happens overnight. It's repetition after repetition after repetition, all of the squats, right? And everything else you can think of as well. So it's not as easy to get someone stronger as it is to take a strong person and develop their technique. So you have to look at each individual athlete and figure out what is holding them up. Is it strength? Is it technique? I can tell you, and it makes me laugh every time, but in the level 1, they always say, well, when technical teaching is finished, then you can do this. And I'm like, but the technical teaching is never finished. I've been lifting 27 years, right? I still can't figure this shit out. I still need to work on my snatches and my jerks and my cleans and all the other things in between. So there's always going to be something to work on. And just figuring out what is going to be the best thing for that athlete is what's really most important.
Speaking of something to work on, one of the hardest things that I have a hard time teaching is the hip contact. It's, for some reason, it's just so hard to teach it.
For the snatch?
For the snatch, yeah. They would get it during the fundamentals, and then during class, it's just keep reminding them to keep doing it.
Well, the first thing I do is make sure the grip width is where it needs to be to make the correct contact into the hip. Because a lot of times they've eked their hands in or done something, and you're like, well, this is why you aren't making contact in the hip, because your hands are too close, right? Or, and that's why we teach from the top down. So we go back and we reinforce the power position, because every time, no matter where the barbell comes, it always has to come back to the hip, right? And so we teach that position first, and then we can teach the knee and below knee, and we can reinforce coming back into that power position on every single thing we do.
How about mobility? Here in the gym, right? We have a few people who can, they have really good shoulder mobility. Mm-hmm. What about someone who just have horrible mobility? What are some tips that you can?
So I always tell people, just because you don't have the mobility doesn't mean there aren't things you can do, right? Like, there's a lot of things that person can still do and work on while they work on mobility and flexibility for those movements. So that's the first thing. It really, really depends on what the cause of the issue is, right? Because everybody in the room could be doing an overhead squat, and everyone could be having a different issue. This person might have tight ankles. This person might have tight lats. And so you got to kind of figure out what it is that you want to work on with that athlete. If it's an ankle issue, it's an easy fix, because you can just elevate their heels a little bit on a plate or something, and usually they can do that good overhead squat. So if that's the case, now you spend a couple weeks elevating the heel and then transition down to the floor, and they should have the mobility to maintain those positions. Sometimes it's more complicated than that, right? Like maybe it's lats or, somewhere up in here that's really tight. And that takes a little bit more work and time and effort to kind of figure out what it is. And then just working on those you want to get good at an overhead squat, guess what? You got overhead squat. You want to get good at snatch balance, you got to snatch balance. It's the same with like people who can't rack a barbell in the front rack. The best thing for them is front squats. Even though it feels torturous, they need to work on that. So we'll do, for like a front rack position, we'll do like heavy rack holds, and we'll make them hold it, and then I'll like push the elbows up, and we'll do some mobility that way. For overhead squats, there's an exercise that I really like where I get a PVC pipe and I put them in the rack and I kind of help push them into a good position. It's just a really nice stretch that you can do to help. You can get them on a foam roller, start working on opening the chest. There's so many different things that you can do, but you have to figure out what the actual problem is before you can really address the exercises.
Yeah, I was laughing when you were saying front rack position because we have a lot of soldiers who come from Fort Carson who love bench presses.
Yeah.
And they have massive chest and arms
Yeah.
and can't hold their front rack, you know?
Front squat's the best way to get better at it.
Just do it, right?
Just do it. Yep.
Okay, so how about training? Because you started in the 90s. How has training changed since then?
I think, I came from a very old school kind of way. And at the training center, it was a pretty strict environment. We trained Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays twice a day, and Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays once a day. But I don't even remember if I had a cell phone when I went to the training center. But there was really no music, no technology, none of that was allowed, right? It was completely quiet. The only thing you had to listen to was your pain and all the noise you were making, but and everyone else in the room too. But and it's very different now because we have people making recordings and wanting to watch their videos all the time. And sometimes I think it's good. You got to kind of find a balance in that. Maybe you're not recording every single set and then maybe waiting till after you're done training to look at them, unless it's something that you need to correct right then and it was really bad or the coach didn't see it or something. But sometimes I think a lot of the technology can be distracting to the athletes. I don't know if you see that here. Do you get a lot of people trying to record everything or no?
No, not a lot. No. Well, I mean, we have a few. But we just troll each other, and it's fun,
Yeah.
But we don't see a lot of it
And
because it's probably because of the way it's set up.
well,
Right?
yeah, and
we're
you
all
guys are
constantly
moving, and we're just sitting in between our sets, right?
Mm-hmm.
We pick heavy things up, and then we sit down. We pick up something else, and we sit down. So it's easier to get kind of wrapped up into that videoing everything all the time. And then, I think the fundamentals of actual training are the same. I just think that it looks a little bit different. I own a gym. People want to listen to music. I can't be nope, we will have no music. You know what I mean? Yeah. So those kind of things are a little bit different from back in the day. But
there's a study that came out about mental fatigue.
Yeah.
That the scrolling actually, it affects your performance, something like that. I don't know if it's...
it's so distracting. I can't see how that's not distracting to have, to be on your phone all the time.
I try not to do it, especially with,
Yeah.
Because I need every strength, especially when you're towards towards when you're closer towards a deload week. That third week is
brutal.
Yeah. It's rough. That was actually me last week. That's
And I always tell people go to the recovery week. That's your hardest week. Because guess what? You think it's going to be easy. Your brain is oh, it's a deload. It's a recovery. And then you're in there and you're like, oh, it should be easy, but you're completely smoked, right? And so those are usually the hardest weeks of our training cycle, are those recovery weeks or those deload weeks, just because your mind thinks, oh, it should be easy. And then you're like, oh, it'll be easy. And then your body says, nope.
Yeah, you're recovering. You're literally recovering.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
And you got to get ready for the next cycle. Another question that I have is there any training principles that you've had in 2000s that you've changed your mind on now that you're seeing a bunch of other coaches sharing their stuff now?
I'm an old school through and through. I think the best things that you can do is stick to the basics. You see all this crap come out on these new training things and exercises, but you know what? We stick to the basics because they work, right? You don't need some fancy exercise when you could squat. And squatting is going to be the best way to get stronger the fastest. And so for me, I don't really buy into a lot of that. We stick to the basics at our gym, and we snatch, clean, and jerk, and and squat and all the derivatives of. And that's usually what gets people the stronger, the fastest.
All right, let's switch gears to coaching internationally now. So I told you this earlier, but I looked within a 500-mile radius that you're the only international level coach here in our area.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that? What are the requirements?
Yeah, so if you are interested in becoming a weightlifting coach or being more knowledgeable, always the first step is going to be the USAW level 1, okay? And then the USAW level 2. And then everything after that is athlete performance promotion. So you have to coach so many athletes to the national level to become a national coach. And then you have to coach so many athletes to the international level to become an international coach. And then you have to coach somebody at the Olympics to become an Olympic level coach. Mm-hmm. So that's the one I'm still waiting on.
So what are the added complexities to training someone who's at an international level, and the traveling, the logistics, or even the pressure, like taking care, like making sure that making sure that you're helping them with their mental being as well?
Yeah. So it's extremely different competing internationally than it is nationally, even for some of these kids that have been around for a long time. Like the national stage is great. You're in your own country. You know what the food is going to taste like. You probably didn't have to travel very far to get there, right? Like you have all of the things that you need. But the moment you step into another country, all of that goes away. We don't have control over a lot of those things, right? So the organizing committee might say, oh, well, when you come in, you're going to be able to get a training in. But we get there and they're like, nope, no training. You can't train today. Or the food is awful. And we've had that many times, right? But we have to eat the food at the organizing committee provides until the athletes compete, because if something happens where something gets tainted or they test positive for something, it's the only way we can go back and track that and make sure that they didn't eat something that wasn't provided for them.
So
right?
you can't just like go to no, you got to eat the food.
You got to eat the food that's provided by the organizing committee until you're done competing. That's our rule. What? So if the food is rough, it's rough for everybody. So you got to kind of prepare for those things. You got to prepare that they said that this hotel was where we're staying, but we show up and we're somewhere else completely. We may not get to train. Like there's all these different things. And then you've traveled, depending on where you're going. If you're in Europe somewhere, like last year Worlds were in Bahrain. Do you know how far it is to get to Bahrain? It's very far. It's very, very far. So that's a couple days travel, right? So, you're not going to just show up there and feel the same as if you did on a 2-hour flight where you got to stay in a really fancy hotel or an Airbnb and you got to eat the food that you like to eat, or you brought what you needed. It's very different. And then the stress and pressure of lifting in an international competition is very different as well.
So how do you help your athletes? Like a kid, how do you help her?
Well, we just talk about we can't always control all of the things, right? Like we can only control the things that we can control, and everything else we are going to let go. So that's a really big step for a lot of the young kids, especially just kind of figuring that out. Like, okay, well, they said this was going to happen, but it's not going to happen. So now we got to pivot, and being able to have some resiliency to do those things is really important. Like not being super like set in your routine, which is easy to do, and then, really being smart about calling our attempts, because we always want, especially youth and junior lifters, to make lifts. Like it's never great for a young kid to show up at a world championship and bum out. It's like worst case scenario, right? Like that's not building confidence. When we have kids lift at meets, we want them to make a significant amount of their lifts. So we're always shooting for 3 attempts. Okay, so we want to pick a smart opener. And then we want success to build on success. But if you go out there and you miss your opener, and then you miss your next one, that is absolutely by far the worst scenario to ever be in a weightlifting meet.
especially at international level.
Oh,
there's so much
it's
pressure.
the worst, and I can tell you because I know I've been there. And it is the worst. And you're like, oh my gosh, like for me at that meet, our Olympic spots were riding on it, and I needed to get a total, and like it was really important. And so then you're putting all this pressure, and then you have all this external pressure, and so a lot can go wrong in that moment. And sometimes it goes right, but sometimes it doesn't. And so, you know, setting them up for success is the first thing. And then they may or may not make it. And if it happens, it happens. It happens to everybody at some point. We just really don't want it to be at those meets if we can help it.
It looks like that kind of experience for your younger athletes is so valuable, because when you're teaching them, I mean, this is like Stoic philosophy where you're teaching them to control what they can control.
Right.
And this is like high pressure stuff. And when they go back to their normal life, like, I've been through a bunch more.
They might train in an air conditioned facility that's really nice and clean, and we're in Cuba. Cuba has no electricity. I mean, has no air conditioning. And the last couple days, they didn't even have electricity, right? Like, these are the things that you never know what is going to happen when you get on the ground in some of these countries. But I competed once in Samoa. It was the hottest place I've ever been in my life. Even when the air conditioning was on my room, I think it was 85. And it was the most humid, you know, and having the ability to adjust and adapt to those different environments is so important.
Do you see that kind of character in a kid where they're adaptable? And is there a correlation between performance and that type of character?
Yeah, I mean, we have some kids that have been lifting with us for years and years. And they're experienced. They understand things are not always going to be what they want them to be, but they show up and they throw down no matter what. And those are the kind of kids that's what we're trying to work toward, right? Like, you know, just being able to go and hit those lifts. And so that's what we aim for. But
do you think it has something to do with their upbringing or at home, the way they're being raised?
No, I mean, because you might have two kids from the same gym and one might be completely the opposite, right? So I don't know if you can make that correlation, but yeah, it's just very different. And some kids are just more resilient than others. Sometimes I think in the U.S. our kids can get a little spoiled just with being like able to have all these things and control these things, and they got to realize, like, in other countries, those kids don't even have weightlifting shoes, you know? Like, they might not even get food every day.
Yeah, some of their weights are made out of cement blocks, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the African countries training, which you see on videos sometimes, right? It's pretty interesting, a piece of wood on the dirt and whatever they can get to do their workouts, what they're using.
So, hey, Jackie, where can we find you online?
So you can find me at Pinnacle Weightlifting Facebook page, or Instagram is Pinnacle Weightlifting as well. Yeah.
Sounds good. What's the address to Pinnacle?
My address for the gym is 4858 North Park Drive, and that's Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Awesome. Hey, Jackie, thanks for coming.
Thank you.